Hey guys, it's Harper. Before I start this story, I want to say that no update has been posted on this story yet, but as soon as one is, I will share it. Enjoy. For 30 years, I've carried this secret, a truth that gnawed at me in moments of silence. It felt like a weight pressing on my chest, growing heavier in time. I never intended for it to be this secret this long, but life has a way of complicating things. The woman who raised my sister, the one she called Mom, was actually her grandmother. And me? Well, I've always been her real mother. I was only 17 when I found out I was pregnant. My mother, her mom, sat me down at the kitchen table, her face a mix of disappointment and determination. She made it clear what needed to happen. I was too young, she said, too inexperienced, too selfish to raise a child. You have your whole life ahead of you, she told me, her voice sharp but steady. I'll take care of this. She'll grow up loved, and you'll get a second chance. Back then, I believed her. I believed I couldn't do it. I let her take my daughter into her arms and name her and tell her she was hers. I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. But every milestone, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, I was there, watching from the shadows, aching to hold her as a mother, but I kept my distance as her sister. I know people will think I'm selfish and that it's all my fault. And maybe it is, but that's what happened, and I don't know why I'm writing this to millions of strangers. I guess I need to vent to people I don't know, and will never know, who don't know me. Now, after Mom's passing, I feel like the walls of this carefully constructed lie are crumbling. She was the glue that held this arrangement together. Without her, the truth feels like a volcano ready to erupt. Every time I look at Mindy, my daughter, I wonder if she deserves to know. But then, I wonder, would knowing do more harm than good? It's not just the guilt eating at me, it's the love. I want her to know that every choice I made was rooted in love, even if it doesn't seem like it. I want her to know and to understand that I wasn't absent because I didn't care. I was there for every school play, every heartbreak, every triumph. But I was there as her sister, not her mother, and that's a regret I can never undo. For weeks now, I've debated telling her. The words stick in my throat whenever I try to say them out loud. Mindy, there's something I need to tell you. I practiced in front of my mirror, but I never made it past that. You're 30 now, with your own life, your own family. Would this revelation ruin everything we've built? Last night, as I sorted through Mom's old belongings, I found a box of letters she had written but never sent. One of them was addressed to Mindy. In it, she wrote, Mindy, if you're reading this, it means the truth has come to light. I only ever wanted what was best for you and for Rachel. That's me. Please try to understand the choices we made. The letter felt like her blessing, her permission to finally tell her. So this morning, I called her. My hands trembled as I dialed her number. When she picked up, her voice was warm, casual, oblivious to the storm brewing on my end. I asked if she could come over for coffee, and she agreed, saying she'd be here in an hour. The hour passed in a blur. I barely remember setting out the cups, arranging the chairs, or pacing the living room for the 100th time. When she arrived, she smiled at me like she always does, and for a moment, I thought about backing out. But then I thought of Mom's letter and knew I couldn't keep this from her any longer. Mindy, I started. My voice was already shaking. There's something I need to tell you. It's about Mom. about us. Her expression shifted. Curiosity mingled with concern. I took a deep breath and said the words I've been holding back for 3 decades. I'm not your sister. I'm your mother. Just like that. Quick. To the point. The silence that followed was suffocating. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, as if the words didn't compute. What are you talking about? She smiled as if I was joking. I explained everything. How I was only 17 when I had her. How Mom stepped in. How we decided it was best for her to grow up thinking she was her mother. I tried to emphasize how much I loved her. How much I wanted to do what was right. But the look in her eyes broke me. You lied to me? My whole life? She said, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. How could you do that? How could you let me believe she was my mother when all along it was you? I thought I was doing what was best, I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. I was so young, and Mom, she convinced me it was the only way. But I was there, Mindy. I was always there. But not as my mother, she snapped. You were there as my sister. Do you have any idea how confusing this is? How wrong it feels to find out my whole life has been a lie? I tried to explain, to apologize, but every word seemed to make it worse. She stood up, pacing the room, her hands shaking. I need time, she finally said. I need space to process this. And then she left. The house feels emptier now. The silence deafening. I know I did what I had to do, but I also know I've shattered something in her and in us. I don't know if she'll forgive me, if she'll ever look at me the same way again. But I had to tell her she deserved to know. As I sit here, staring at the door she walked out of, I'm filled with both regret and hope. Regret for the years we lost, for the lies we lived. But hope that someday she'll understand why I did what I did. And maybe, just maybe, she'll let me be the mother I always wanted to be. I'll try to update if need be. It started like any other date. Well, almost. I had agreed to meet someone I'd never seen before. After weeks of texts and calls, there was no photo exchange, just an arrangement through mutual friends. At first I was nervous but hopeful. After all, everyone deserves a chance at love, right? I'd chosen the local cafe. It was a cozy place, not too crowded, but just enough to feel alive. I'd arrived early, my heart racing with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. I wasn't sure what to expect, but my gut told me he'd be nice. I'd heard stories from friends about blind dates that went awry, but I wasn't prepared for what was about to unfold. He was late. I told myself it was no big deal. People run behind. I distracted myself with the menu, trying to calm my jittery nerves. Then I saw him walk in. Tall, with dark hair, wearing a leather jacket that looked just a bit too perfect for the evening. He spotted me almost immediately, a slow smile creeping across his face as he approached. His name was Mason. The first few minutes were pleasant enough. We talked about trivial things, work, travel, favorite foods, but there was something off about him. He leaned in just a little too close, his gaze lingering a second too long. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. He was just excited, right? Maybe he was nervous, like me. As the night went on, I started to feel uncomfortable. He'd touch his cup, and then suddenly touch my hand, almost as if it were an accident, but not really. The conversation was one-sided, with him dominating most of it, and I realized I hadn't even mentioned anything personal about myself. He never asked. The real shift came when the night ended. We stepped outside and I was relieved it was over. I needed to get away, but Mason offered to walk me to my car, and I hesitated for a moment before agreeing. It was dark now, and I wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but didn't want to be rude. That's when it happened. He walked too close, his breath brushing against the back of my neck. His hand grazed mine again, not accidentally this time. I stiffened, feeling a chill settle in the pit of my stomach. I pulled away slightly, trying to put some space between us, but he followed, insisting that he'd make sure I was safe. "I'll just wait until you're inside," he said, his voice soft but insistent. "You never know who's out there." Something in his tone didn't sit right with me. I nodded and quickened my pace towards my car, eager to get inside and lock the door behind me. I gave him a polite smile, a silent hint that I wanted to go. But as I unlocked my car, I saw him standing just a little too close, watching me with eyes that felt too familiar for someone I'd just met. The date had been uncomfortable, but I hadn't expected it to escalate like this. I made my escape, driving away quickly, trying not to think about the unsettling feeling in my gut. But later that night, my phone buzzed. I checked the message, thinking it was a friend, but it was Mason. "Had a great time tonight. Hope to see you again." I smiled nervously, debating whether to respond. It felt too soon, but maybe I was overthinking things. I responded politely, telling him that I'd enjoyed the night, but wasn't sure about a second date. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The next morning, there was another message from Mason, this time a little more eager, if you will. He mentioned how much he had thought about me, about how we were meant to be, and how he couldn't wait to see me again. I hadn't even responded to his last message yet. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just eager, I thought. But over the next few days, the messages started coming more frequently. At first, they were sweet. Compliments on my smile, my laugh, how much fun he had. But then the tone changed. He asked if I was seeing anyone else, if I had been thinking about him. There was an odd intensity behind his words. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just a little too forward, but there was no harm in replying, right? Wrong. As the days passed, his messages grew more intrusive. He asked where I had gone for lunch, what I was wearing, and why I hadn't responded to his last text. I stopped replying, but it didn't seem to matter. He started showing up at places I frequented, sending me messages when I was at the grocery store or on a walk to the park. The worst part? He was always just there. I'd seen him standing across the street, watching from the corner of my eye, where I'd get a message, and he'd mentioned something specific I had done that day. "I hope you enjoyed your coffee this morning," he'd text. Or, "You look beautiful in that red dress yesterday." I felt trapped, and the fear began to set in. I had no idea how to handle it. I didn't want to confront him, not when he seemed so unpredictable, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The breaking point came one evening when I found a note on my doorstep. It was from Mason. It was simple, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. It said, "I know where you live. I'll be waiting for you." That's when I finally called the police. They took my report seriously. They suggested I change my routine, avoid places where I usually went, and take extra precautions. They warned me about his escalating behavior, But the fear still lingered in my chest every time I walked outside, every time I checked my phone. I didn't feel safe anymore. The stalking didn't stop immediately. It took weeks of consistent harassment before the police were able to track him down and intervene. They were able to get a restraining order, and eventually the messages stopped, but the fear still haunted me. I was never the same after that blind date. I stopped going on dates altogether for a while, too afraid to trust anyone again. It wasn't just the physical threat, it was the psychological toll of being watched or feeling trapped in your own life. The fear that someone, a stranger, could turn your world upside down with nothing but their obsession. But in the end, I learned a hard lesson. Not all blind dates are harmless, and sometimes the worst thing you can do is ignore that gut feeling, because you never know who's watching or how far they'll go. The hum of the highway under the tires was soothing, almost hypnotic. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, stealing a glance in the rearview mirror. The kids were all nestled in their seats, heads bobbing to the rhythm of the car's motion. My wife, Emily, sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, occasionally looking up to point out some quirky roadside attraction or a scenic view. "Only 2 more hours," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Mom's going to be so excited to see us all," Emily replied, smiling warmly. Our road trip to visit my mother had been planned for weeks. It was the perfect blend of family bonding and adventure. The drive had been smooth, with laughter, snacks, and the kids' attempts at singing along to the radio, filling the hours. But then, something changed. At first, it was subtle. A black pickup truck appeared behind us, close enough for me to notice it, but not close enough to raise alarm. "This guy's been behind us for a while," Emily remarked, glancing at the side mirror. "Probably just heading the same way," I replied, brushing it off. However, as the miles passed, it became clear this wasn't a coincidence. Every turn we took, every exit we skipped, the truck followed. The driver kept a consistent, almost menacing distance, never speeding up, never falling back. My hands tightened on the wheel. "Should we stop?" Emily asked, concern creeping in her voice. "Not yet," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "Maybe he'll turn off soon." But he didn't. The tension in the car grew palpable. The kids, oblivious at first, started asking questions. "Why is that car so close, Dad?" my oldest asked. "Don't worry, bud," I said, forcing a smile. "It's nothing." Finally, after miles of this bizarre pursuit, I had enough. I pulled off at a rest stop, heart pounding. The truck followed, parked a few spaces away. The driver, a burly man in a tattered baseball cap, stepped out carrying a baseball bat. My stomach dropped. "Stay in the car," I said firmly to Emily. She grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" she whispered in my ear harshly. "I'm just going to talk to him," I lied, knowing full well I didn't want to confront this guy. As soon as I opened my door, the man took a few steps toward us, swinging the bat casually at his side. I froze for a moment, then slammed the door shut and hit the gas. The tires screeched as we sped out of the rest stop, my heart hammering in my chest. "Call the police," Emily urged, her voice trembling. "No," I snapped, adrenaline clouding my judgment. "We'll lose him on our own." But the truck stayed on us, weaving through traffic to keep up. The kids were crying now, Emily's phone in her hand as she looked at me, pleading silently. "Fine," I relented. "Call him." Emily quickly dialed, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. They directed us to the nearest police station, a small building just off the highway. I pulled into the parking lot, relief flooding me as I saw the squad cars lined up outside. The truck slowed down but didn't stop, disappearing down the road. Inside, the officers were calm and professional, taking our statements and assuring us they'd handle it. The kids clung to Emily while I paced, my anger bubbling just below the surface. It wasn't long before we got word. The man had been found and apprehended. He'd been stopped a few miles down the road, still clutching the bat. "He's in custody," one officer said. "Looks like he's got a history of similar incidents." "You did the right thing coming here," the officer said. Relief washed over me, quickly replaced by a deep, simmering satisfaction. Knowing the guy wouldn't be able to terrorize anyone else made the ordeal feel a little less traumatic. As we climbed back into the car, Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad we're safe," she said softly. "Me too," I replied, glancing in the rearview mirror at the kids, now fast asleep. The rest of the trip to my mother's was quiet, but the sense of security we felt at the police station stayed with us. When we finally pulled into my mom's driveway, the porch light illuminated her warm smile. I felt a wave of gratitude. Despite the chaos, we'd made it together.